a participant in this. I'm very excited. If you are nervous, I was telling Vay, just take a deep breath. Just speak clearly. We're just gonna have fun. Just act like it's us talking, because basically it is, you know. So if you don't have any water, I would definitely get some because your mouth might get dry.
We're live.
A participant in this. I'm very excited. If you are nervous, I was telling you, just take a deep breath.
Yeah, I'm gonna
just speak clearly. We're just gonna have fun. Just act like it's us talking, because basically it is, you know. So if you don't have any water, I would definitely get some because your mouth might get dry.
Oh my god, I hear the lag. Okay. I just sent the link to everyone. And then
Yo, Kaveh, I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if you heard that. Were you able to silence?
Yeah, the feedback was because I had us talking at like for a hot second. At the same thing as how do I edit? Yeah, I fixed that. Sorry. Edit profile, website. Bada bing, bada boom. Submit.
Sure.
Load, motherfucker. Okay, we're chilling. We're live. There are 2 people watching. I have it pulled up on my phone just in case we run into anything. Okay, we're chilling. I'm going to turn off all your screens for now until 7:05, and then I'll bring everyone back on. Video. Video. Okay. And then Slam, you and I will start this. Wow, you can watch it straight up from your Instagram. You know excuses today.
If everyone wants to share the link, you can definitely do that. Get as many people as possible.
Seven watching. We're chilling. Okay. To everyone tuned in right now, we are going to officially start at 7:05 so that we give some time to everyone to, you know, tune in, get ready, you know, get your snacks, get your water. And we'll get started soon. So yeah. I feel like I'm gonna have to like keep saying because I don't know who's gonna tune in. And
that's all right.
One, 6, and 7. Okay.
If what's it called? I'll state the vision, and if you want to state the goals, and then I'll state the topics, and then you can talk about the IG post. So just like back and forth.
Sure.
Where,
Sounds good. Okay, so again, I don't know who's tuning in, but we got 5 more minutes until we start. And you're gonna be interviewing your sister, right?
yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you want to text me that.
I feel like I should put.
Check the phone. Please. Okay. Just to reiterate, because I know there's a 30-second lag, and I just gotta keep saying it.
This right here.
I don't know why it's tired.
Does that not even work?
Just hold it up. Just for the next 3 minutes or so, if you want to just hold it up, in the screen so that everyone knows what's up.
I think it's upside down though.
I mean, you could put 2 and 2 together. There we go. Just hold it like there.
Oh shit. This is difficult.
I believe in you.
Like that? That's cool.
You played sport all throughout college. You can hold up a phone for 2 more minutes. I guess now, for planning for the future, we should just do it. Oh, the screen, tap it. I guess going into the future, we should, take a screenshot and put it as our background picture so that we don't have to keep.
Aren't you screen recording? Can you just put it in the chat?
Yes, yes, but what do you put in the chat?
Open the chat up and say we're starting at 7:05.
Right. I thought of something else. It's kind of pointless now because it's in like a minute, but this is what I got my degree for. Right now, the live stream is just you because everyone else turned their screens off. So smile, look pretty.
It's all good. What's it called when we save the video? We'll have to edit out the front. Unless people want to watch me. That's cool too.
Free marketing,
For sure.
Okay. I'll start my video. So it is 7:05 and we are going to get this going. Um, we are your co-hosts. My name is Kavehi and this is Slam. Uh, to introduce ourselves, I went to the University of Tampa. I studied or got my major in business management and then double minored in entrepreneurship and sustainability. And then Slam.
Yeah, my name is Slam. Just graduated from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. Studied philosophy. I was a law track and I have minors in environmental sustainability and justice ethics and law. I represent the Nanticoke, Lanai, Lenape people of New Jersey and my Jamaican ancestors. And a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a friend and he was communicating that, we need to create more safe spaces to have dialogues around tough conversations. So I put on my story that I wanted to do this around Black Lives Matter. And Kavehi told me that we should turn it into something bigger, which is why we're having this Zoom call. Uh, and if you guys didn't know, Kavehi represents the indigenous people of Hawaii, which is also super cool. I don't think she said, but the vision of this, setting the tone, is to create a safe and constructive space for dialogue around the protest, to educate and inform.
And the goals of this panel is to voice concerns and questions, to go about talking about like calls of action outside of social media and sharing first person perspectives, especially from the protests that have been going on. Not only we decided to pick people kind of spread out across the nation. And some of the topics of discussion, we got a few questions from Instagram. So thank you to everyone who has, submitted or asked a few questions and concerns. And then we have a few topics of discussion that we're going to try to dive into after we get through the IG questions. And so the I guess the topics of discussion, we wanted to try to touch upon the history of racism in America and how it has brought us to this point. How were the riots and looting? Like, how did that start? And do you think it's necessary? Or what do you think about that whole topic or situations? How is the media's role in the movement? So I guess how has the media been contributing to what's going on? And then what should the president's role be? And then how can we continue the conversation going forward? And then what can we do? Like I said before, outside of just using our social media platform, what can you do at home or what can you do going back into the world, I guess, post COVID or whenever that decides to end. And then, like I said before, the questions from our IG. So Slam and I wanted to take a few minutes to introduce our speakers. We have Michaela. She attended the University of Tampa and majored in political science. She's been to a few protests in Tampa and Orlando. We have Esther. She was born in South Korea and was raised in Chicago. She also graduated from the University of Tampa and she double majored in communications and advertising. And she's always been kind of passionate about like social and racial justice to help impact the world for the better. Then we have Alyssa, who attended Loyola Marymount University for graphic design. And she's been to the protests in LA and Long Beach. And then our other guest, Slam's gonna go over.
Our other guest is Ashton Dunkley. She studies American Studies as a PhD student at the University of Minnesota. She has been living in Twin Cities for almost 2 years now. She uses she, her pronouns, and her people, like mine, are from the island of Jamaica and the Nanticoke Lenape Nation of New Jersey. I do want to reiterate that lately we've all been so consumed with, the amount of media, the amount of opinions coming from other people, and it is it's overwhelming and very stressful. I know I was very stressed the first couple of days. So this isn't to stress you out even more. We just want to have a productive dialogue about the protest and to figure out what we can do more, what we can do, more as the youth of this nation. A lot of people have come to me with questions, especially as we created the Setting the Tone platform, and we want to keep talking about it, keep this conversation going, because change cannot happen in merely a month of protesting, signing petitions, and doing donations. This is going to be a lifelong battle, and we need to educate ourselves to be able to fight in the best way possible. So right now, we'll start with Ashton. She'll introduce herself a little bit and share her perspective on the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening right now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted first to thank Setting the Tone for arranging a space where we could all come together and unpack some of the events that have unfolded following the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police almost 2 weeks ago now. I also wanted to thank the rest of the panel for being here and taking time to be a part of this discussion. And I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts and thinking and growing with you. And to everyone tuning in right now, thank you so much for putting in the work, engaging and listening to these discussions. That's what change is all about. So I really appreciate being in this space right now. Like the rest of you right now, I'm just tired. I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I'm stressed, and I've been hurting all month. When the video of Ahmaud Arbery's murder was released in early May, I spent a lot of time crying, trying to process, just feeling really frustrated. And I couldn't make it through a run without bursting into tears thinking about that. And just when I thought that I was beginning to be able to process through those emotions and work through that pain, that's when I then learned of the murder of Breonna Taylor by the Louisville police. And all of those feelings came flooding back, like I'm sure they did for a lot of people throughout the country. And yet again, as we're trying to process the loss of yet another Black life, I found out that George Floyd had been brutally murdered by the Minneapolis Police Department just a few miles from my home. I want to emphasize that I only moved to Minneapolis a year ago to start at the University of Minnesota. So while I have had some time here, I'm not in any way speaking for Minneapolis residents who have lived here all of their lives and have had to deal with the MPD for so long. I'm just here to share my own experience. I've grown to love these cities and the diverse communities that are here. Over the past 2 weeks, I've just been trying to do anything I can to support. I've been protesting, getting supplies, bringing them to the front lines, donating food to food banks. There's petitions, and trying to share information, stay informed. And then, that goes along with checking in on your friends and also doing the really important work of checking in on yourself. So it's been a really exhausting few weeks. And then you add on top of that we're in a global pandemic right now, which I think can also sometimes be easy to forget for a second. But yeah, so I had a really hopeless feeling when I learned about the murder of George Floyd. I kept thinking to myself, like, why aren't people listening? The police are literally killing us. And I just felt like nobody was listening or paying attention. And so I must say that it's given me more hope to see how many people have stepped up and are speaking out. I read just yesterday that 50 states and 18 countries across the globe are having protests, making this an incredibly large civil rights movement and a very historic moment in our lives right now. And so seeing that gives me hope, seeing allies listening and speaking up and working to educate themselves on how racism and white supremacy operate in this country gives me hope for a better future. And I hope this momentum can keep going. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ashton, for sharing that.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to have Michaela come on and introduce yourself a little bit more.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Michaela. I wanted to thank you guys for putting this all together. I think it's going to be a great space to really share ideas and talk about current topics. So I just recently graduated from the University of Tampa with a degree in political science and a minor in international studies. My primary focus was exploring injustices around the world and how social media is being used during this, events like that. My goal is to continue to work for nonprofit organizations that fight for human rights. Personally, I was raised in a super small suburban town up in Connecticut, where unfortunately hate runs rampant. I, as a Jew, have experienced awful hate from my peers, but growing up, I learned that people don't know that I'm different from them unless I tell them. And I've learned that what makes me different is a lot easier to hide than what other people face oppression and hate from. And I've learned to accept that fact and kind of use it to stand up for those whose voices go unheard. I use my privilege as a platform for others that don't get the same privileges that I get. I'm super happy to use my education that I received to educate and mobilize my peers to a greater good. One of my biggest things coming on here was to kind of expose how the system is not working for the people as it should be. I see many people say that our system is broken, that our system is failing us, when unfortunately the system is working just as it was designed. It's really not hard to see that all these awful, awful human rights violations the government is committing at a time like this, and even during the pandemic, the American government was built on the backs of slaves, and the system has done nothing but continue to oppress their lineages. It's celebrated racists who have profited off of Black communities and Black culture for centuries. Our history books have lied to us, painting America as the superhero of every story. They've gaslit us into believing the white man has the answer to everything. On top of that, the American media system, it really does control our every thought, constantly feeding us false narratives to incite fear and hatred, creating this us versus them mentality. And it really comes from both ends. It's trying to split the American public, pitting us against each other so that it distracts us from the atrocities the government is committing against its own people. During this dialogue today, I really hope that anyone watching it takes what we say into consideration. You do your own research and continue to have discussions with your peers. In order to achieve change, it is super important to continue to speak on the injustices we see every day, to shed light on them and to educate ourselves. And I want to remind everyone, you don't get to tell someone how to react to a situation that you have never personally experienced. And I think that's super important in this conversation. We must listen and learn from those around us and unite in solidarity against inequality and injustice. And to end my little thing, I just want to close with this quote. It just says, the opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of good is indifference. In a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much. That was very well said. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Esther.
Hi. So yeah, I'm Esther, and like Vehi mentioned, I am a Korean American. I just graduated from the University of Tampa, and I majored in communications, particularly in advertising and PR. basically my goal with that is to make meaningful content for the world, just to like actually bring an impact and work with companies and nonprofits that have the same mission as me. So throughout this movement, I've been super vocal on social media because I just feel like that's our modern day news, especially for this generation. And so I've just been trying to use my platform for a reason, just putting out like, you know, different resources and things like that. Particularly, I've been really trying to educate the Asian community and specifically the Korean community that I surround myself with, because, you know, if like you shouldn't have to be Black to be vocal about these things and to recognize this as an injustice and to fight for it. So I've been trying to educate my friends and family, asking them not to be silent. And in that, I've attended a lot of protests in Tampa for the past week and definitely been able to see things firsthand. It's definitely been eye-opening, and the things that you see on the news, just seeing it in person makes it a lot more personable and just reminds me what we're really fighting for. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about me. And I guess my personal experience is I definitely wasn't like for the movement my whole life, and I once had to be educated on it. And I know that a lot of people are just oblivious to it, and perhaps it's kind of like, oh, it doesn't affect me, so why do I need to care? I feel like that was definitely my mindset. Like in high school, I grew up in Chicago, but then I lived in the suburbs in a very super white town, and was blind to a lot of the injustices that the Black community faces. So once I became educated on that topic, I just couldn't keep it to myself. And so, especially with the movement happening, I've just been trying to be really vocal on social media and sharing my own personal journey with it, so that people know that, you know, like I also wasn't this huge advocate my whole life, but I also like at one point needed to kind of wake up and see it for how it is. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me and my journey through the movement.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Alyssa.
Hi. So my name's Alyssa, and I've grown up in the LA area, and I just recently graduated from Loyola Marymount University in LA, and I feel very privileged to have grown up in a pretty like liberal area, and feel privileged that activism and topics of social justice have always been somewhat accessible to me. But I wouldn't say I have been as active in actually like taking action and educating myself until maybe the past like 4 or 5 years. Just because similarly, I was raised in a conservative family. And so having like very like curious conversations and starting to dip my toes into activism was something I did from kind of a young age, but I wouldn't say I'd started becoming very active in it until the last few years, as these topics have become more prevalent, and I had the privilege of receiving an education and learning more, and just trying to be more active. And I would say I've always been really passionate about justice, and it's my goal just personally to continue to learn more and grow every day for the rest of my life, because I think it's just kind of a never-ending effort and journey, and as well as spreading those resources and education that I gain to others that I come in contact with, people in my family and friends, as I feel it's a huge responsibility and something that's really important. And I've been attending protests in LA and Long Beach, and I've been trying to stay active in every way that I can through posting a lot of resources in an organized way on social media, and having a lot of critical conversations with people in my life through the internet or in person with my family members. And I have become pretty passionate about like the idea of normalizing like making mistakes in the language and actions of anti-racism and activism and allyship, as it's something that you can never be exactly perfect at, and no one's perfect at it, but it's really important, I think, as in my position as an ally, to stand alongside people and try to like help them along and grow with them. And just the focus on keeping up the momentum of this movement, as it's not just like, I don't know, I see it kind of the way of like, it can be like a marathon that you do for your whole life, or it can just be a sprint of this past week. And I'm seeing where people are starting to break off and lose momentum. And I'm just trying to help inspire people to keep going with it. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And thank you guys for including me in this. It's a great opportunity.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Okay, so thank you again for everyone for being here and for giving a little bit more information about you guys' selves. And now we're going to dive into the Instagram questions. So Slam and I will be reading off one by one. And with this, I'm sorry, my dog's crying. And with this, we're going to allow everyone can like talk if they want to, or if like one person wants to talk again, you can take the stage. But yeah, so the first question that we received was how to talk to our family members when they talk over or shut us down. This person keeps trying, and then they just wanted some, tips or solutions that you guys have found effective.
Okay, I'll start off. I had this one friend from home where both of her parents and then both of her brothers, so essentially everyone in the household, was conservative. They supported Trump. They're the type of people that it was really focusing on like how the protesters were rioting and looting everything and like the really negative aspects of everything. I think when you're faced with people just constantly coming at you, telling you that you're wrong, but you like truly know that you're not wrong, it's super, super, super important to build a strong case and like know what you're talking about. Because if you know the facts, if you know the real facts, then them denying those facts, telling you that you're wrong, it doesn't change that those are literal facts. They're just being ignorant. They're denying those facts to your face. I also, when people don't have an argument, they love to say, oh, well, that's just my opinion. Normally, those people are the ones that will say that and then they don't let you have your opinion. At that point, there's almost no point in arguing because it is very clear that they came into this conversation with no intention of actually sharing ideas. They're only looking for you to get angry and for them to be like, oh, why are you getting angry? You don't know what you're talking about. So get your facts straight, build a strong argument, and then just always remember that there is no point in arguing with someone that has no intention of changing their ways.
Alyssa?
Yeah, I think I think that's really good advice, as well as like I think it's effective in some situations to set boundaries at the beginning of a conversation and say like, okay, we're starting to talk about this. It sounds kind of like cheesy, but you could have like a talking stick that you pass around, because there's a lot of interrupting when people get passionate, and then it's not effective when everyone's talking over each other. So either having that or just having a system of accountability where when someone interrupts, you say like, hey, stop, hold on, let that person finish in a group conversation, because otherwise if everyone's talking over each other, then no one can be heard. And also just like, I don't know, giving people space to talk and to voice their opinion is important so that you can fully hear where they're coming from. And then yes, having your facts prepared and having your opinion and stance and facts and all of that background done so that you're prepared to enter that conversation after fully hearing where they came from, and having like healthy boundaries in that so that you're not burnt out and you don't leave the conversation feeling like it went in one ear and went out the other.
This is something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of weeks and really last couple months, and trying to have conversations about like topics. I think it's important to understand when talking to your family that they're just as stressed out about all of this as you are, and they're also trying to find ways to make it kind of fit with their worldview to help them not be as stressed. So I think it's important to also acknowledge that everyone has their own bias. If you're human and your brain is working the right way, you have bias. It's how we connect one and two to make sense of the world. So if you're adding in new information to someone and it's disrupting the way they're looking at the world, that sense of unknowing again and not really having the answer is going to make them scramble. It's going to make them get defensive. It's going to make them maybe shut you down, speak over you, because they don't want to hear it. I think one of the most important things that we can all do right now is, like she said, create a talking circle, have a talking stick, and don't argue with people. I don't think you necessarily have to change someone's mind. One thing I was told over the weekend is to just try and get everyone not to think the same way about a problem, but facing the same way at the problem. So maybe find a commonality between you and them, and use that commonality as a bridge to connect with them and actually have a productive conversation. It doesn't have to get, loud. It doesn't have to get violent or, negative. Use it as a positive experience. Ashton.
And I was just going to add on real quick that this isn't something that you have to do by yourself. If your family is willing, maybe you're feeling like those conversations just aren't working. If your family is willing, sit down and have a movie night where you guys decide like, all right, we're all going to sit and we're going to watch 13th on Netflix, and try to see if we can like learn something together and then maybe talk about it afterwards. Just thinking about the resources that are available to you, not putting your mental health on the line. You always want to protect that first, but if you're willing to take those extra steps, that can always be a helpful way to go as well.
Okay.
Let's
Guys,
go to the next question.
Did you want to take on the next question?
Yeah. The next one is something that Ashton actually just touched on, is how to manage mental health and keep fighting as well. I feel guilty when I want to log off, talking about media.
This has definitely been something that I've been navigating my way through over these past couple of weeks, because it's really easy to feel guilty about being like, wow, this is really overwhelming me. I feel like I need to just separate myself from it, but you do understand the fact that like you're separating yourself, but the world's still turning and you like want to stay like up to date on what's happening. So that's been something that has been difficult for me. But I had to start thinking about this movement. I think it was brought up earlier as a marathon and not a sprint. If you're going to be in it for the long haul, you need to identify your feelings, and figure out what you can do best to help yourself, and to help others. So I know on days where like if I was at a march and the next day I'm feeling really, really physically tired and a little mentally drained, and I'm like, okay, well, I think I can like, maybe I can't go out on the front lines today at this march, but maybe I can stay inside, try to rest, recoup, and sign petitions, or like maybe I just really, really need a nap. And just trying to identify those feelings you're having, which can be hard at times because they're all coming at once, and trying to do your best to address it. But it's taking care of yourself is never something you want to feel guilty for, because you can't, at the end of the day, you can't help others if you just aren't in the right headspace and if you're not helping yourself.
Esther, go for it.
Okay, I was just gonna say that, yeah, I feel like a lot of people have been experiencing like this draining feeling, or just feeling like exhausted of just constantly having to fight for something that we really shouldn't have to be fighting about at this point in life. But I guess something that I think is important is that don't try to like prove yourself to anybody. For example, like if you're just posting stuff because you're worried about what other people might think of you, I would highly not encourage that, because at the end of the day, like it's like between you and this movement. And I think that could even be a part of like false activism, which obviously, is nothing, that's like nothing good will come out of that. But also, like Ashton was saying, it's definitely not a sprint. And if that means just taking a day with like no devices, no social media, like it's okay, you know what I mean? And even if you just want to be on social media, like you want to do like an hour a day, or maybe you turn off all your devices like starting at, I don't know, 7 p.m., like something like that. You don't have to be on social media to be doing your part and to still be active in the movement. I think there's a lot of factors that go into, of course, posting and things like that for your like followers and maybe like your friends and family to see. It's really important, but you can't keep doing your part if you're exhausted. So just recognizing that you matter in what you're doing for this movement, and just taking like a mental health day or just logging off for a couple of hours is definitely okay. And yeah, recognizing that there's other ways, maybe just like talking to people about it, or just still educating yourself, but maybe just not scrolling through social media like every 2 seconds. Like I know that I've been feeling like that kind of a little bit, because I just felt like I had to be like on the go. But yeah, like I said, we also have to be like mentally and like physically there to keep the movement going. So yeah, just recognizing like what you need. It's different for everybody, but yeah, just taking like some time for yourself, maybe just like taking a day. Yeah.
Word. Thank you. We're going to like, we're noticing we only got a few more minutes, but we still want to get through all the IG questions. So the next one is, how do you effectively bring others up to speed? Because like Esther had said that it's not like, or like everyone has like shared that it hasn't been like we've gotten into it at like a young age, or some people have just gotten recently into it the past couple of like years or months. So I'll let Michaela take this one or start it off.
So I think a big thing with this is like, obviously you do not have the time to go through like an entire 400-year history lesson on systematic oppression and why people of color have been targeted by the government for hundreds of years. I think it's really important to focus on possibly what questions they may have, or like key points really. So like the actual, not actual statistics, but just things that prove that there is a problem with police brutality, or when they continuously target Black men and women, and how the entire name of lists, like you don't need to go case by case. I think there are certain points that are definitely should be touched on, but again, I think it should really focus on what they're trying to find out, and then you can lead or point them in the way of resources that they can educate themselves on, because again, we're all adults. You're a capable adult. You can read. You can go look up your own resources and really try and educate yourself. But yeah, definitely pointing them in the way of resources and everything like that.
I think this is a good way or a segue into one of our topics. So one of the topics that we definitely want to touch on tonight, and I know we plan to end at 8, but we might go over, is the history of racism, especially within the police departments of America. And I'd like to have Ashton talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, sure. I can touch on this, and I'll try to be as brief as possible with the amount of time given. But first, it's impossible to be brief when you're talking about this, like Michaela said. But I think something that has been brought up a lot to me from people is a response like, well, that happened 400 years ago, or that's in the past. Like, why are you still upset about it now? And so I think it's really, really important, if anything, to recognize that the history of racism in the US is not in the past. It is continually occurring, and it's manifesting itself in different ways, and we have different names for it now. But like, it's still happening. So there may not be slavery right now, but you have to consider mass incarceration. You have to consider the ways in which white people still continually benefit disproportionately over Black people. When you're thinking of healthcare and something like COVID, where Black people are disproportionately dying because of the way that our system has been set up, less access to healthcare, et cetera. And then something else important to think about is the origins of our policing system as we know it, and how our policing system is deeply embedded with slave patrols. Slave patrols were a direct forerunner to the modern policing system. They were night watches, and slave patrols came around as people who wanted to protect the law and order of the antebellum slave system, making sure that people weren't trying to run away, that they were remaining enslaved, capturing those and bringing them back into slavery. And as slavery ended, the policing system, those groups of people remained, and they're continuing. And I just think that's really important to understand the history and what the foundation is. Because if your house is on a unstable foundation, it's just going to continue to produce problems. So it's really important to look into that history.
Yeah, I just want to add real quick onto that. I think you have to think about, even after 55 years after the Civil Rights Act, we're not really seeing too much change in our Black communities and our communities of people of color. Although we do have, doctors and lawyers, we even had a Black president, the bottom 50% of Black people are still facing the same disproportionate effects of the system, basically. And to get into that, let's talk about it. When U.S. cities grew during a time of extreme inequity, the zoning policies used put communities of color disproportionately around waste dumps, railroads, industrial centers, ports, sewer systems. And still today, Black education is falling behind because non-white school districts receive 23 billion less in funding on average. Let me add a couple more to that. Like Ashton was talking about, Blacks are still amongst the highest in unemployment. We are amongst the highest in infant mortality rates. Blacks are 6 times more likely to be arrested than whites. And so when people say it's systematic, discrimination might not be in the law, but it's the systems that still create disparities in our communities. That is the systematic oppression that everyone is talking about. In Philadelphia right now, 21% of the Black communities are food insecure. And I have one more. Blacks are more likely to get expelled through kindergarten to 12th grade, which creates less diversity in professional spaces in the future. So there are a lot of effects from, I guess, discrimination, not on the books, but in our systems is a good way to put it.
And just jumping off of that really quickly, I had seen someone earlier today who had said, who had made a point that I thought was really valuable, in the fact that systemic oppression doesn't mean that, oh, there's so many racist people in our country, and that like everyone hates me, like everyone hates people like BIPOC folks. That's not the case. Systemic oppression means that literally the system that our country is grounded in is anti-Black. And even if there were literally no more racists, if we operated this system the way we are now and we continue to operate it that way, there's still going to be people who are disproportionately negatively affected. And so I think that's really important to think about.
Thank you guys for, just again, like it's hard to go that deep into this topic, but thank you again for touching upon it and giving us you literally slammed us with all these facts, so thank you for that. And I want to like bring it back, and then still like I still want to try to answer all of these IG questions, to let people know that like we are listening to them and we are trying to provide answers, and to segue like how Ashton had said, we want to talk about the history of police. I want to bring up the topic that someone had asked of, there has been police in some cities kneeling and praying in solidarity with protesters. Do you think this is a type of performative solidarity is helpful? And they said, I know displays of solidarity can be beneficial if they're genuine, but honestly, that's impossible to guarantee. And we have definitely seen a lot of before and after pics, especially I think it was in New York of that, was it New York of that old man who got like thrown to the ground?
Yeah, in Buffalo.
Buffalo, and to our surprise, you know, you'd think that something would change out of that, and we saw that the entire squad decided to resign in protest to the two officers who got booted. But I'm gonna let someone else go into their opinions or their thoughts on, I guess, solidarity with police and protesters.
I think kind of similarly to talking about like individuals and individual acts of racism or anti-racism or individual biases, like it's kind of detracting from the conversation of systemic racism for people to focus on like, well, I saw cops kneeling with people in this city or praying with people or marching with people in this city. And then of course the additional fact that in a lot of those cases, like 5 minutes later, they start tear gassing people and it is absolutely performative. And even if it is genuine in some cases, it's still just is kind of detracting from the message and the goal of defunding the police, abolishing the police, and talking about systemic issues. So in that way, I would say that it's unhelpful.
I'll say something that I have seen that I do think is helpful. I mean, it's been incredibly rare that I've seen it, but there have been cases in the past 2 weeks in which cops have quit because they do not agree with the actions that their co-workers are taking. And so they're leaving the force. And I realize for financial reasons that may not be possible for everyone, but I think that as opposed to kneeling and then getting up 2 hours later and tear gassing someone, I think it makes a much larger statement to say that you are not okay with the way that the system is operating and you won't work under those conditions.
Thank you guys for answering that question. The next question that I want to get into is one of a lot of substance. I think it came from a friend who I was talking to who was struggling in conversations with his own friends about the movement. And what he had said was that he looked up the facts and it seemed that whites are getting killed by cops too, and even more so. He wanted to know how I responded to that. And at the time, I didn't really know, but after doing some research, I have come up with an answer. So I feel like, yeah, as a lot of white people are getting killed, that is true. I was able to find an example. There's a guy named Daniel Shower. He was unarmed. He was on all fours, begging for his life, basically, and he pulled back his hands to pull up his pants. And a cop, his name was Philip Brailsford, killed him. It was not only found that the officer Brailsford had engraved the words "You're effed" on his pistol, but he was acquitted, he was reinstated, and he was allowed to retire with his pension. He was allowed, as a cop who murdered another human being, to retire with his pension. An example like this may show that police killings are not as racist as it's made out to be, added to the fact that in 2015, cops killed twice as many whites as blacks. So that is all true in his statement. It was a good question. But what you have to realize is that there are 6 times as many white people in America as there are blacks. So proportionally, black people are more likely to be shot and killed by cops than white people are. If we look at the deaths of unarmed whites versus blacks, due to being shot by the police, the number is about the same, which again means that there's a wider disparity when it comes to black people being killed by cops. Some argue that it is due to the rates that blacks and whites commit crime. But in Minneapolis, where George Floyd died, there is no correlation between the location of police killings and the crime rates in the area. And that was found in the 2018 Star Tribune investigation. Some may also argue that blacks commit more homicides, but most black deaths from cops are not the result of the cop trying to prevent a homicide. They're most likely, or they do occur more, from blacks being taken into custody while traffic stops are occurring and when cops raid homes. I have a couple more. Blacks are more likely to be pulled over for drugs as well and searched, and it has been found that whites are more likely to turn up contraband. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, then why are blacks being pulled over so much if that's the case? And if white people really did get killed just as much as black people, then you also have to ask why 74% of blacks caution their children caution their children about acting in the right way when they're around police versus 32% for whites. And that's from the Huffington Post poll. Likewise, 7 out of 10 whites believe that cops use the right amount of force when getting arrested, while only 33% from the same people asked agree that cops use the right amount of force. And that was from the 2016 Pew poll. And when white people see abuse of another white person, it's easy for them to think that if I don't act in a criminal way, if I'm careful about, the words I use when dealing with police, then that won't happen to me. But when a black person sees another black person being killed for the color of his skin, then you can't easily say that that can't happen to you. It could easily happen to you, your mother, your daughter, your sister, your brother, your nephew, because they are black. So that argument is nothing but a downplay of the seriousness of the pandemic that black people are facing with police brutality. And I think it's also an attempt to kind of play the victim, maybe not purposefully, but it's not going to work. And you just face the facts. And the fact is that black people are being killed disproportionately than any other race in this country. And it's become a pandemic, and people are sick of it. We're waiting for justice, and we're waiting for laws to condemn police that kill unarmed people. And I would like to thank Radley Balco for providing that information in his Washington Post article, White People Compartmentalize. Black people do not have the luxury. So Kaveh, can you take us into our next topic?
Yes, thank you again for slamming us with the facts. So I wanted to take another question we got from IG and mix it with one of the discussion topics that Slam and I created or came up with. So this IG question is talking about Trump's role taking attention away from the Black Lives Matter movement. And I wanted to combine that with the discussion topic of what should the president's role be. So I think those kind of relate with one another. And again, if anyone wants to start answering that. Michaela, take it away.
Okay. So it's talking about Trump's role taking away the attention from the Black Lives Matter movement. Absolutely not. He has a huge hand in it. He is the leader of our country, the leader of the most powerful nation in the world. And he is denying people their literal right to peacefully protest. He tweeted, which he should have his Twitter taken away, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. The president of the United States ordered the killing of his own people. That is not a leader of a democracy. That is the leader of a dictatorship. He has militarized the police against the people. He basically declared martial law, which essentially gives the president the right to do anything. He is sending the military into areas where people are trying to peacefully protest. Throughout his entire presidential career, he has encouraged racism, he has encouraged sexism, he has encouraged homophobia. He has made fun of disabled people, people of color, women. people of other religions on national TV. He has incited fear. He has used minority groups as scapegoats for problems of the American government, problems that his entire cabinet has created for the country. He has an essential role in this movement. He passes and vetoes bills. He is the leader of the country in a time like this when all 50 states had protests. Everywhere across the country is crying out for help, and he is refusing to listen to them and threatening them until we quiet down. That is not the leader of a democracy. This should not be the leader of our country. This should continue to be talked about because voting is one of the primary things that will enact change in our country. And I know people say that we shouldn't be talking about voting right now because voting does nothing. But again, it's a chain of command. You vote in the right people, they'll be able to make a change. But anyways, yes, we should continue to talk about Trump and his role in the movement. It does not take away from what is actually going on. It is just another flaw in our system that needs reform. So yeah.
Well said. Thank you.
Ashton, I'd like you to talk a little bit about maybe what's been happening in Minnesota since Trump has been vocalizing his thoughts on the movement. Do you feel as though things have heightened in terms of violence and unrest on both sides of the demonstrators and those against the demonstrators? And I don't mean to bring up any trauma that you've witnessed, but I do think it would be important to display your perspective on that.
Yeah, as I'm sure many people who are protesting know, like there are real ramifications to the president saying things like when the looting starts is when the shooting starts, and giving the green light to civilians. Would he say something along the lines of, I'm like ready and willing to mobilize both the military and civilians, which is unacceptable because then it ends up giving a green light to white supremacists, the KKK, that they can do whatever they'd like to the protesters, and they're not going to face major ramifications for those actions. I know myself and other people in Minneapolis have been on high alert because there have been reports of white supremacists leaving gas tanks and gas covered rags outside of people's homes, predominantly the people in the areas in which the protesting is occurring, unmarked, untagged vehicles patrolling the area, attacking Black, Indigenous, people of color. So there are real ramifications to this, and people are getting hurt. And we've seen that happen here. We've seen that happen in other countries where Black men are getting run over, and then the person who does so is allowed to leave. That's unacceptable. When a semi truck, which happened nearby my house, attempted to drive through a large group of protesters, of which many of my friends were there. And then the cops immediately went to get the driver and to take the driver away, but also tear gassed and shot protesters with rubber bullets after they had just faced the trauma of almost being hit by a semi truck. And it's a miracle. And I'm grateful that no one was hurt, at least not physically, but definitely mentally and emotionally. And so, yeah, there's just a lot been happening. Military tanks driving through the cities. It's not an easy feeling. It makes it difficult to sleep, especially when you're wondering, people who are meant to protect and serve, if they drive by, are they going to arrest you at any moment? Or is a civilian going to take it upon himself to do so because the president has said that that's okay?
I just like to thank you for sharing that. I know, you and everyone else in the protests are going through a lot right now. So thank you. And this is a big deal, guys. I am tearing up a little bit just thinking about it because there are people right now risking their lives for people of color to have human rights. The next question is one that I don't think we really even should be asking, but we need to answer. There's a lot of back and forth on the media uh, about it, and it's basically, is Black Lives Matter a hate group? Um, I know the Montgomery governor, whatever, said that they were, and that was his statement. But I like to hear what other people have to say about that in your eyes.
Take it away, Esther.
Okay, they're definitely not a hate group. And I guess I'll just personally share my experiences at the protest. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, I've been going to the protest in Tampa all week. And compared to, like, you know, bigger cities like New York, LA, things like that, I really wasn't expecting for the Tampa protest to become what it was. And honestly, it was just like so many people there that it really encouraged me, that like we're reaching more people. And you know, all these people, like, it was pouring all week, but we just like marched because, you know, justice needs to be served, rain or shine, whatever happens, like we want our voices to be heard. Now, in regards to the hate group question, the whole time I was involved in the protest, and what I've been seeing across the board is that it's meant to be peaceful. And so we haven't, like, people don't bring any like violence. There wasn't even like opposition groups there that were to like invoke a reaction from us or anything. And before the march begins, the people that are facilitating the protest that day, they always emphasize that it's a peaceful protest, and to just like stay with a friend, make sure you have somebody that you're with. But they always say that this is a peaceful protest. And yeah, and so what I've seen though in my experience is that cops will just, thousands and thousands of cops will just show up in like full gear, like as if we're going to war or they're fighting like an enemy country or something. It just blew my mind that, and there was like tanks rolling up, and it was like honestly so heartbreaking to see, because we're not marching for no reason. Like, people keep dying. It's one after the other, and justice is not being served. Obviously, the Black community is constantly not being heard. Like, it's just a fight for humanity, and for them to show up and pull up in like such intense, I don't know, reactions, I guess, it just blew my mind. And unfortunately, yeah, I have experienced, I personally wasn't at the front, so I didn't get the backlash of it, but I know people that literally got tear gassed, who got hit with rubber bullets, who got like slammed to the ground just for protesting. And yeah, it honestly is heartbreaking to see that. And then oftentimes people use that as leverage, because obviously when the cop starts lashing out, perhaps their friend or somebody else is going to try to help them and yell and say stop, and then they use that as leverage to just incite more violence on the protesters, saying that they did it first, saying that they did something to invoke the police officers first. So yeah, in my experience, we're always peaceful, but the police are not. And sometimes the story gets flipped, depending on what media or whatever the case is. But yeah, 100%, Black Lives Matter movement is not a hate group, and it's actually quite the opposite. But yeah, just wanted to share like my personal experience in the protest and just emphasize that not hate group at all.
I have a couple of things to say. Yeah, I would answer no. Black Lives Matter is not a hate group. The movement is about protecting lives. And I think one thing a lot of people don't consider, and I was thinking about this originally too, and I was thinking whether I, am okay with the burning down businesses or the looting and all of that. But if my brother was killed by police tomorrow, I think I would destroy some things if the cop had gotten away with it, or if he purposely seemed like he purposely killed my brother and only got manslaughter. I would be outraged. Black people are dealing with hundreds of years of trauma that's bruised every single day. And when something like this is happening and it repeatedly happens and repeatedly happens, and it seems like they have no voice, they have no one to listen to them, the legislators aren't listening to them, the president doesn't care, of course they're going, some people are going to react in a violent way because maybe, them destroying something is going to gain some attention and make people realize, like, maybe if they don't care about Black lives, hey, they're going to destroy my business. We need to go ahead and give them human rights, which is terrible that we have to go that route. But there's a couple quotes that I want to share. John Rawls said in his theory of justice that militant action and obstruction was warranted when all other democratic means were exhausted. So I'd like the audience to think about whether Black people have used every other democratic means in this country to get civil rights, human rights. Really think about that, because the answer is yes. MLK said, a person that everyone keeps inciting about how we need to be peaceful right now, that a peaceful protest only works when your overseer has a conscience. How many more Black people need to die before someone realizes that this isn't okay? Dr. Tara J said, and this is very important, that there is no moral compass you can hold over the heads of people trying to disrupt social order through violence. They are not seeking righteous approval. They are trying to shake the foundations of society and destroy the bedrock to get free. They are not engaging in activism. So I'd like everyone to think about those three quotes and reflect and come up with your own answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Michaela raised your hand in regard to continuing on the topic of does Black Lives Matter encourage violence? Do you want to still touch upon that? Okay.
I'll keep it short, but essentially what he was, or I want to build on what he was saying, where a lot of the people that are saying that it's a hate group or they're the ones inciting violence are the same people that I was kind of directing my statement to before, when I said that if you have not experienced something, you do not get to tell someone how to react to it. So again, normally the people that are saying that Black Lives Matter is a hate movement or they're the ones inciting violence are people that have never experienced being targeted because of their skin color or having your son or daughter shot and then having it recorded and blasted all over social media and constantly seeing that video over and over again. They've never experienced trauma like that. Those people do not get to say how these people should be reacting. And then also, I wanted to mention that the president has said a lot about Antifa, which is anti-fascism. And it is not a group of people, and they have been trying to officially market as a terrorist organization so that protesters, even if it was peaceful, they're trying to find a way so that they can be deemed terrorists under Antifa. But again, people that identify themselves as Antifa are like extremely left-wing, or extremely leftist, and those are the white people that are destroying the buildings. They're the ones on video that are lighting cars on fire and stuff like that. But again, those are not the peoples whose reactions matter. They're just the ones inciting the violence. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
Lastly, before we jump into this next section, I think Esther wanted to bring up one more thing before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I just want to comment on looting, just like really quick. And I'm sorry if this doesn't come out as professional as I want to say it, but a lot of people, I've been seeing a lot of people post about looting, saying how bad it is and how is this helping the movement? You guys are just making it worse for yourself. And everyone that wants to post about the looting just seems to be so silent about the whole point behind it. Like, why do you think that people are looting? The Black community is constantly not being seen. They're not being heard. And honestly, if it takes looting, then it takes looting. And I don't want to say that too lightly, obviously, because I'm not like a business owner. I don't own a building. My business personally hasn't been looted. And I guess what does break my heart are the, like, you know, small local businesses that have been affected during, you know, the looting part of it. However, we cannot rebuild or restore a life. Like, we will never be able to bring back George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or the countless other Black lives that have been taken. But what we can do is help rebuild and restore our communities. And I just feel like a lot of people want to talk about the looting, but they don't want to do anything about it. Like, if, you know, like, we can all go out there and help restore that local business that was looted, or, you know, the little boutique that was affected by it. Like, we can rebuild those buildings and help them, you know, restore all those materialistic things. But like I said, we cannot bring back a life. We can never restore those lives. And I just think it's sad that a lot of the looting is incited by the opposite, like, group. Like she was saying, like, there's been a lot of videos going on, like, white people are the ones throwing the first brick and things like that. And then they just try to kind of seize the moment and cause like chaos and destruction. And then they try to use that as leverage, saying, look at like, they're criminals and all this stuff, you know, when really it's like other people that are doing it first, and then they try to throw it back on the Black community again. So I just think we should all be cautious of that when talking about looting as well, because a lot of the times it's not even starting with the people who are for the movement. But yeah, like I was just saying, I think if people want to be so vocal about the looting, then they also need to be just as vocal about why it's happening, and the movement itself, and the murders that are occurring as well. And yeah, there are a lot of GoFundMes and stuff going around too for like local businesses that were affected by it. So I'd encourage everyone to, you know, donate if they can. But yeah, there are so many ways we can rebuild our communities. And even in doing that, it can unite a lot of people, which is the whole point of this movement. So yeah, that's just like my little take and solution when it comes to looting as well.
I do want to touch on this very briefly. Not myself, but I want to have Ashton talk about it, because this is a very touchy topic. I know I feel very differently about it, I guess. But Ashton, if you could share with people kind of the origin of the looting that started with Target and other things that you've seen in Minnesota, I think the audience would appreciate it if we could get that perspective.
The origins were the cops murdering George Floyd. First and foremost, I think it's really important that people keep it centered in their minds that these just didn't spring out of nowhere. That what's happening right now didn't spring out of nowhere. It occurred because the MPD murdered George Floyd. Police departments across the US have continuously murdered Black people. And you know, people have been quoting MLK a lot right now, but they don't like usually quote the one where he says like the riots are the language of the unheard, which I think people have touched upon a lot already, is that they're not being heard. And I use the word riot very lightly as well. I think that people are using it with that some news crews and things are using it with the intention to pull out some negative connotations. But I don't know if it fits right. I feel like uprising fits right. Like, this isn't happening out of nowhere. What I saw in Philadelphia when I lived in Philly after the Eagles won, people smashing stores, stealing from stores, lighting cars on fire. And the cops were giving them high fives. There were no tear gas, there were no rubber bullets. So, and it was a completely different reaction. The focus on violence always tends to, I don't know, people seem appalled by violence when it's protesters doing the violence, but not the cops, which I think is incredibly problematic. And just something for people to think about. I know for me, I don't think anyone has the right to tell Black people how they should be feeling right now. And so I think that's a super important point. And I think it's also important to recognize that in areas where this is happening, where they've been systematically disenfranchised in a variety of different ways, there's going to be things that people need. I saw people taking diapers, taking formula, but on the news, they're going and taking video games and they're taking TVs. But there are also people who need to survive. And so, yeah, I don't think that anyone has the right to tell Black people how they should be feeling in this moment and how they should be responding. I do find it problematic when I see videos of a bunch of white people going and looting the Van store, taking advantage of a really painful situation. So yeah, I think those are pretty much all my thoughts on that.
Alyssa?
Just really quickly to touch on my experience here in LA. I went to a protest organized by Black Lives Matter LA, and in these organized protests, well, first of all, I want to say I think it's important to attend protests that are organized by Black leaders and to not contribute to non-Black people organizing protests. And with that being said, these organized protests that are put together by Black Lives Matter or by Black leaders, they state an organized message where everyone is unified in the message of what's going on, why we're there, and there's a unified understanding of what's going on. And it's very well articulated and put together and organized. And so in my experience last weekend at the LA protest, we started out with that message and the speakers, and then everyone starts marching for miles and down many streets. And I didn't see anyone start looting or any violence until I saw a group of white men start picking up tires outside of a tire shop that they planned on throwing at a window. And the crowd, like all in unison, was like encouraged or like yelling at them to stop and put the tires down and discouraging that. And that's not what we were there for. It's not on non-Black people to react in that way. And it's not on non-Black people to tell Black people how to react, as Ashton already said. And so that was the only like sort of destruction or looting or anything that I saw, and that is at a big city protest in LA. And then later on there was a fire, and it was like planted violence by the police. It was a planted cop car on fire by the police. And then that's what the news crews like to focus on. That's what the media likes to focus on. And so if you're not there firsthand to see these things or talking to people who have been there firsthand to see these things, I think it's important to question where your knowledge is coming from and question whether or not that could be bent a certain way.
Thank you, guys. Those are all like amazing answers. So the last question we got on our Instagram, like I know we've gone over our time, and I mean, we're chilling because there's no rush to anything else. But this question is going to, it's you can't go into it within like the time we have left or like within 5 minutes. If anything, I think we've all agreed that this would have to be its own talk within itself. But I'll quickly bring it up as quickly as I can. But the question is, what is intersectionality and how does it relate to Black Lives Matter? I wanted to start by reading a definition that I pulled from Oxford Languages to help at least give the more technical definition of it, and then I'll allow everyone to, you know, add to it. So intersectionality, again, from Oxford Languages, is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So, I mean, again, that within itself is a very loaded question. But again, we still want to try to address everything that was asked on Instagram. So I'll allow everyone to, you know, give in a few tidbits, but truthfully, I think that in order to continue this and go over it effectively, I think in the future, we're going to have a full talk or episode on that question alone.
I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, we're raised in the US here to think that everything is separated into these very succinct, different categories, and that's the easiest way to organize things, is to separate those things into categories. I think intersectionality is really about breaking down that mindset. And instead of thinking like, okay, the Black Lives Matter movement, this is a problem that is about anti-Black racism and police brutality. Someone could say that, but that would be a very narrow, distinct category that just isn't going to cover the full extent and everything that goes into this problem. So when you're thinking about systemic racism in the US, you have to think about police brutality, yes, but you also have to think about the other ways that anti-Black racism manifests. You can think about economics and class, and redlining, how Black people are disproportionately not given loans, or their areas are marked off as poor. And then you have education that runs into it, because now schools are funded by property tax. So if you come from a poorer area, your school's also poor. So you can't just think about systemic oppression and racism in just like one vein. If you're going to think about the Black Lives Matter movement, you also have to think about how their lives are being disenfranchised by healthcare, and gender, and that all runs into it. Breonna Taylor receiving a lot less attention. Her murderers, the 3 cops who shot into her home, have still not been arrested, at least to my knowledge, as of like earlier today, at least. And so that's something to think about. You always have to include these other layers and think about the way our society overlaps, because we're not separated the way we're trained to think we are.
I think that's a good answer. And like Avehi said, I think we would need a whole entire episode to cover that in its totality. So Kavehi, we're gonna start closing things out. I do appreciate everyone for tuning in. I appreciate our members who came in to discuss and share their perspectives and their insights. Kavehi, go ahead and.
Yeah, I just want to carry off of that. Thank you guys again so much for participating. I think everyone brought like great info and tidbits to the table. I do kind of want to, I don't want to say end on a lighter note, but like a lot of the stuff we were talking about was a little bit heavy. But I guess the closing remarks I have, and we've kind of, everyone's brought it up, is that this isn't like a sprint, this is a marathon. Whether you're jumping into the mix now or whether you've been in it, that's great. But keep in mind that just because like Black Lives Matter, we've got to keep using our social media platforms to help keep the momentum flowing. And just to help like reiterate that this is a marathon, I wanted to like read off different movements that we've learned and heard about to show that this is a marathon. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted 382 days. The Greensboro sit-ins lasted 6 months. The Freedom Rides lasted 7 months, and the Birmingham movement lasted 37 days. Another one that is close to my heart is the Protect Mauna Kea, again, like people who are against the TNT telescope, is that started in like the official like protest itself started in August of 2019 and was going into this year and only kind of got put on pause because of COVID. But like we've all talked about, like at this point, racism is a bigger pandemic than COVID itself. But with that, we still need to keep in mind of staying safe during these different protests and gatherings. So don't forget to get tested. But I'll let Slam finish it off.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit more, if you can't have a peaceful protest in this country without being brutalized by the cops or having the National Guard called on you, a great example is the last couple of days, the North Dakota Access Pipeline protest. What does that mean for our democracy? What does it mean for the rights that the Constitution promises us as Americans? These are all things that we need to think about, and they're all, I would say, threats to the American way of life, the American dream, and like I said again, our democracy. And for those wondering what they can do outside of social media, if you can't get to a protest, maybe you're not allowed to go, maybe you're fearful. Um, like we've been saying this whole time, the conversation starts at home. The conversation starts with your peers, your coworkers, your parents, um, those who have a white privilege. And that's not to be stigmatized. It only means that out of everything in this world, the only thing that's not making your life harder, you might have other battles with. The color of your skin isn't making your life harder. So that's your white privilege. If you have that, then it's up to you to hold your friends accountable, to hold all of your social circles accountable for upholding justice, not being discriminatory, not being racist, not being transphobic, homophobic, not being sexist. It's up to you to deconstruct, like Ashton's been telling me a lot, deconstruct the systems that were put in place by past white people to oppress Black people, to keep white people superior in this country. Um, it's just not a 2-week trend. You can't just donate or post something and then think it's over. Like Kaveh said, this is something that we're going to be fighting for. Hopefully not for the rest of our life. Hopefully we get something done, you know. But I like to live in a world where my grandchildren aren't limited. Their happiness, their capacity for intelligence isn't limited by the color of their skin. I like to live in a America where our democracy is actually upheld by our president. I like to live in a world where, you know, those who are in power aren't hiding all the things that, you know, the industries are putting into the environment that are killing us. So there's a lot of different things that we can all be speaking out against. This is the first one that we need to tackle. And it's all up to all of us to keep staying active. Get active in your city legislations, your town hall meetings. For my Black people, you know, it's up to us to keep our community strong, to have self-love, to love each other, you know, uphold our women who have been fighting for us since day one, to stay in school so we can actually have positions of power where we're capable of making change, because we cannot rely on white people to do it for us. We have to be proactive. We have to stay productive. We have to stay positive as a people. And thank you again for everyone who came. And I hope I spoke clearly. This won't be the last time that we will talk about stuff that is like this, injustices and such. So thank you.
Yes. Just, I guess, food for thought till our next episode. Something that my mom said where I was like, you're not wrong. Was she said the seeds of slavery have sown the malaise of racism today. So with that being said, please DM us, comment, send us your thoughts, questions for our next episode, and we hope to see everyone next week. And thank you for tuning in.